It was a week that Tony Khan should have been able to celebrate, with Warner Brothers Discovery adding 2 more hours of live AEW content on Saturday nights, and AEW having just sold over 60,000 tickets a few weeks ago for its Wembley Stadium debut. He should have been riding high on Cloud 9. Instead, he is once again dealing with drama surrounding CM Punk. Drama that not only overshadowed the Collision announcement, but could very well doom the entire show before it even airs a single episode. At the upfronts on Wednesday at Madison Square Garden, AEW Collision was officially announced as a new weekly 2-hour series airing live from 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern starting June 17th. The new logo, very much inspired by the old WCW Monday Nitro logo, which I think is cool, given the show is airing on the same network Nitro did. And I would love to see them adopt a Nitro-esque stage and set for the show. The headliners mentioned in the press release and seen on the official poster were Samoa Joe, Miro, Thunder Rosa, Powerhouse Hobbs, and Andrade El Idolo. MJF was on the poster, as was Orange Cassidy, FTR, and the House of Black, all of whom are currently title holders, which I take to mean that the champions will be floating between Dynamite and Collision, even if there is some sort of unofficial brand split. I don't think they're going to have a draft or anything the way WWE does it, but there clearly is going to be a separation of some sort between the two rosters, and we're going to see people on Saturdays who we may not get to see very often, if at all, on Wednesdays. Letting champions float between the shows as needed, that's the right way to go. Except, I do think the TNT champion should be exclusive to the TNT shows, and the TBS champion should be on the TBS show. Despite all the rumors of the new media rights deal being announced, there was no mention of any new deal, although they must have made some sort of new deal, at least for Collision. I mean, they're adding over 100 new hours of live television a year. I sure hope they're not doing that for free. But we don't know if that deal is separate from Dynamite and Rampage or if everything is lumped together. The current deal expires in September. Warner does have the option of extending that deal into September of next year. But nothing was mentioned. That includes any potential streaming deal. I still think All In ends up streaming on Max, which launches this Tuesday, because there's still been nothing said about how people who aren't at Wembley Stadium are going to be able to see the show, and there's got to be a reason why they're holding back on that. The one AEW show that you will be able to watch on Max starting June 9th is AEW All Access. All 6 episodes will be archived there. HBO Max already has the first season of Roads to the Top on there. There was supposed to be a second season before Cody left, so it's possible whatever deal they had for that show extended to All Access, which basically took the place of Roads to the Top Season 2. But for now, that's the only AEW content that you'll be able to stream on Max. If it does eventually end up that AEW moves to streaming all of its pay-per-views and special events on Max, one potential downside would be if they decide to start running them monthly, like WWE does. I like the current AEW model of 5 pay-per-views a year. They've got Revolution, they've got Double or Nothing, now they have Forbidden Door, which is fun for the fans who also like New Japan. You get the, inter-promotional matches once a year. You've got All Out, and you've got Full Gear. All In would qualify as, I guess, a special. I don't know if that's going to be an annual thing. It might be. But I like the way the current model is set up. It allows Tony Khan to spread the events out, make those shows feel special, save his bigger matches for those 5 shows. I would hate to see that change. 6 also. 6 would be fine if they want All In to be an annual thing. I'm cool with that, but do they really need 8 to 12 shows a year? I don't think they do. It's the way of the world now with WWE and UFC. I get that, but I just don't think it's something they need. Jason Sarlanis, the president of Turner Network, said that adding Collision will allow them to, quote, satisfy the massive demand we felt from our hardcore fan base, which is, I think, a pretty good indicator that the Turner folks, they're more than happy to appeal to the hardcore AEW fan base. For all the people who wonder, how will they grow their audience and how will they grow their audience to appeal to the casual fan? Turner doesn't seem to be too bothered by that right now. And that's good news if you're a fan of the current AEW product the way that it is. If you're not, well, Sucks to be you, I guess, but if you're a fan of the way things are currently in AEW, that should come as a positive bit of news. Warner Brothers Discovery is doubling down on AEW. That really should be the headline. Instead, the headlines were about who was missing from the announcement and from the poster. And that's CM Punk. Punk was initially listed in the press release. He was going to be announced as the main star of the show, but less than 24 hours before, AEW told Warner Brothers Discovery to remove Punk from all of the materials, which they did, but some email links that went out had CM Punk's name on it in the headline, even though when you clicked on the link and it took you to the announcement, his name was nowhere to be found. That's how last minute the change was. They had all their email blasts ready to go, and they forgot to take his name out. Comicbook.com reached out to Warner directly and was told CM Punk is not affiliated with TNT's AEW Collision. Fightful indicated that there were still plans for Punk to return as of this week, and the changes were last minute. Clearly, there were plans for Punk to return because they had Samoa Joe in the announcement, even though he's on Ring of Honor as their current television champion. Why else would he be on there if not for the fact that Punk wanted to work with Joe, which we heard about last week, and clearly he was getting his wish. But now, everything is up in the air. Mike Johnson of PW Insider on Wednesday reported that the rumor making the rounds is that Punk and AEW are again at odds, now over the status of the return of Ace Steele. In asking around, there appears to be something to that situation. The belief among those we've spoken with is that Steele was expected to return in conjunction with Punk next month and working behind the scenes. However, the story making its way around AEW backstage at Dynamite is that a decision was made that Steele would not be working backstage at the actual tapings. As you might imagine, that left Punk and AEW on opposite sides of the discussion, which in turn led to Punk being removed from all promotional material released for the Collision series. One person believed MJF replaced Punk in the graphic for the series, but we have not been able to confirm that yet with multiple sources. We do know that Impact Wrestling had interest in bringing Ace Steele in for a tryout, and when the invitation was passed on several weeks ago, their belief was that meant he was bound for WWE or AEW. So the timing fits in that a return was on the table for Steele. So that's from Mike Johnson. Sean Ross Sapp added some more to this. Fightful was told there was a meeting this week between AEW and CM Punk, and it was extended to Punk that Steele would have the ability to be with the company and work directly with Punk. However, it was made clear that he would not be able to be at AEW television. We have not learned specifically how Punk reacted to this outside of him not being in agreement with it. There were plans for an AEW camera crew to film material at Punk's home on Wednesday, but we have not been told if that actually happened. So Johnson and Sapp had far more to say about Punk this week than Brian Alvarez did. But Punk decided to hop on his Instagram stories. He took aim at Alvarez specifically for going on Observer Live and saying that it's not impossible this deal has fallen through. That's in reference to CM Punk returning. On Instagram, Punk told Alvarez to shut the fuck up and stop talking about him. Said, friendly reminder, I haven't been on television in 9 months and you all still can't stop talking about me. Maybe stop, you'll feel better. Love, hate, it's all the same. I don't enjoy being the sole person that props up entire misinformed clickbait industry based on toxic gossip from lying sources. But what can you do? When you're the king, it comes with the crown. One more before I go really quick. The parasocial relationship that some fringe wrestling fans has is unhealthy. I get the tribalism, but picking sides is silly. You don't know me, you don't know anybody else, so just go touch grass. He's right about one thing. The tribalism today is toxic and stupid. That I think we can all agree on. And if you don't agree with that, then you are the problem. Now, for his part, Alvarez responded in this way. He said, I didn't get any story wrong. There wasn't one thing I said on the show yesterday that was wrong. I still don't know why this guy spent I don't know how long on Instagram, which to me, it was almost like high art when he spent all this time on Instagram and then finished with a video where he told everyone else to go outside and touch grass. So yeah, I don't know, Phil. You're right. I don't know you. But you know what? I do know a lot of people in AEW. I have heard from people in AEW, and I have heard from people in Warner Brothers Discovery. And they all said the same thing. There's an issue. I don't know why you're mad at me. Maybe you should talk to the people in your own company. Or maybe you should talk to the people at Warner Brothers Discovery, which is where I got all the information. I didn't make it up. I didn't make one thing up. Why am I talking about CM Punk? Well, let me think about this. I do a wrestling radio show where my job is to cover wrestlers. You're a wrestler, and you are supposed to be the centerpiece of an announcement, and you weren't. Gee, I wonder why I would be talking about this now. You know what's going on here, and I got sucked into it. I didn't want to. This is the same thing that FTR was doing, and I shouldn't even say FTR. This is the same thing that Dax was doing, and that is to try to create in the minds of the wrestling fans some imaginary beef that I have with Dax Harwood or with CM Punk. I don't have any beef with CM Punk or Dax. You can think what you want of Meltzer and Alvarez, but here's a reality check. They're not the only ones that reported on Brawlout. You may think they played favorites with one side over the other, but there were lots of different outlets reporting on what happened backstage that night, and the fallout that came after, and then months later the negotiations for Punk to be brought back. The Collision rumors, those go all the way back to February. The reporting on Tony Khan trying to get meetings organized with Punk and other people on the roster, the meeting that allegedly happened with Punk and Chris Jericho a few weeks ago, and now everything that happened this week. Meltzer and Alvarez are not the only two people reporting on this. And all of that is to say that someone, and no, it is not just the elite, people, multiple people within AEW and people within Warner Brothers Discovery, whether it's Mike Johnson or Sean Ross Sapp or Nick Hausman or Andrew Zarian, people are speaking to these men and providing them with this information. And if CM Punk has a problem with what's being reported, then he's free to call all of them out for it. But the bigger issue, and the one that I talked about months ago, is that if Punk believes this is all fake news that is being leaked to make him look bad, and none of it is true, how can there ever be trust? Other than the money, why would Punk want to go back and work for a company filled with people that he believes are out to get him and have an agenda and don't want him there? Why would anyone want to work for a place like that? Alvarez is not wrong. If Punk has a problem with what is being reported, he should take it up with Tony Khan and the people in AEW. And if he already has, then good for him. But if we believe that every negative thing that's been said about CM Punk and this whole fiasco is not true, or is being blown out of proportion, then they should have parted ways months ago and saved themselves the headaches and the aggravation. All this is an unnecessary distraction in a week that should have been one of the happiest for AEW. And all it has turned into is another embarrassment for Tony Khan. The one thing I will say about Vince McMahon is that if this were happening in WWE on his watch, he never would have let this shit get to this point. This idea of quietly splitting the rosters so that Punk would be segregated on one show to keep him away from the elite, if that wasn't a giant red flag right there, I don't know what is. That's a fucking blinking neon billboard is what that is. So none of this is surprising to me. Nick Hausman says that Ace Steele was actually rehired months ago. And if Impact reached out to him weeks ago about a tryout and he turned them down, it's very possible that was because he was already rehired. Hausman said AEW denied that to him when he inquired about it, and AEW denied to Meltzer that Steele was rehired as a producer. Does that mean he wasn't hired as a producer, but maybe he was hired in some other role? That we don't know. It could be that they're playing semantics here. Maybe he wasn't rehired in his old role. Hausman says top people in AEW were not aware of any of this until this week, and when key talent found out about it, they were all shocked. As they have a right to be. Meltzer says Ace Steele returning was apparently one of Punk's requests or demands to return, and that he and Steele were of the impression that Steele would be back in his old role as a producer. And the story is that Tony Khan told Punk, look, he could have his job back, and he could work closely with you, but he would do so remotely and not be brought to the buildings for the shows. And at that point, that's where things fell apart. The Ace Steele stuff is the biggest head scratcher to me. For weeks now, we've been hearing, rumors and reports and murmurs about apologies and meetings and, legal threats, and mostly about Punk and Jericho and the Elite. I thought we were done with this. I thought the Ace Steele thing was just a thing of the past. The fact that we're still talking about this fucking guy, he was the lone person fired in the aftermath of Brawl Out for allegedly hurling the chair that cracked Nick Jackson in the face and for biting Kenny Omega. To the point where Omega's arm had visible bite marks on it in the days that followed. There was an actual dog in the dressing room that night, but Ace Steele was the one biting people. He was the only one fired in a company where Tony Khan never fires anybody. I get the impression he doesn't really like confrontation here. I mean, Leva Bates is the latest example of this. They just let your contract expire and they don't say anything. Not even to the talent whose contract is expiring. I mean, look, everybody should know when their contract expires. And if no one is saying anything to you, then you should probably assume that they don't want you back. But I have to admit, that would be very awkward. If I were under contract to a company and I was working there for years and years, and I had a week left, let's say, on my deal, and nobody said anything to me, after all my years there, that would make me very uneasy. That would be a little awkward. But he doesn't fire anybody. But he fired this guy. So for him to be fired, he had to have done something bad. And yet, if these reports are to be believed, the entire deal for Punk to return and to build this entirely new franchise around him could possibly fall apart over Ace Steele. Are you fucking kidding me? Ace Steele is not nearly that important to AEW to be the cause of all this. And if that's what's holding things up, I get that Punk wants to do right by his friends. He and Ace Steele go all the way back to the Ring of Honor days. Steele was at ringside in Chicago when Punk beat John Cena to win the title at Money in the Bank. They go back a long way. But if it ends up that is what blows up this entire thing, then it's time for Tony Khan to cut his losses with Punk and move on. Because someone that did what he supposedly did should not be brought back to work for that company. He's not worth it. And the idea that Tony Khan would secretly hire him back is completely batshit insane. I cannot even fathom that it would have been considered. For someone who supposedly wanted to make amends, the idea that Punk wanted so badly to come back and was about to. He was on the verge of coming back, this big, massive announcement, and he supposedly wants to work with Samoa Joe, and so it looks like Tony Khan is gonna have him work with Samoa Joe. Like, all the pieces were falling into place. He was gonna have this entire show on the 17th next month devoted to him at the United Center. He was going to be promoted as the centerpiece of this new live 2-hour show and have input into the talent that he would be working with. He was about to get exactly what he wanted, but that he would blow it up because of Ace Steele, because he wouldn't be welcomed back into the buildings with him. If that's true, then all that shit that we heard about apologies and forgiveness. Remember he posted that video on Instagram about forgiveness? That guy that was talking in the video, I can forgive you, but that doesn't mean I have to work with you. All that stuff, it was all bullshit. It was all bullshit. It was all one big giant crock of shit. Maybe he feels guilty that his friend lost his job on account of something that he had nothing to do with, other than being Punk's friend. Maybe he feels he was an innocent victim who was only defending Punk. And he's adamant that he wants his friend to get his job back. That's very noble of him. Delusional, but very noble of him. Punk once bought Joey Mercury's house so that it wouldn't get foreclosed on when Mercury was having drug problems. I get being loyal to your friends, but CM Punk's friendship with Ace Steele should be of no concern to Tony Khan. He assaulted two EVPs. Two EVPs who also happen to be in the middle of contract negotiations and who the company wants very much to keep. So there's a lot riding on whatever decision Tony Khan ultimately makes here. I don't see how you bring that man back. I'm talking about Steele. I don't see how you bring that man back. And now of all times, you can't do it. What kind of message does that send? This is a no-win situation for Tony Khan because he either gives in and he gives Punk exactly what he wants at the expense of alienating some pretty important people on his roster. And with no guarantee that there won't be some other blow up in a few months. You know, Punk's got him by the balls in that scenario. Or he stands his ground, he loses Punk, and it very well may kill Collision because he was going to build this entire show around a big name that he no longer has. And he's already got some big buildings booked. The announcement's been made. This entire show was built around the idea that CM Punk would be the poster boy for it. And now he wouldn't be. And he's got to find a way to make that show compelling enough to get people to tune in for 2 hours every Saturday night, which is not going to be easy even with Punk. Even with CM Punk, it was going to be a challenge. So it's a no-win situation. Mike Johnson says the plan has long been to hold that first Collision at the United Center. If Punk and AEW can kiss and make up in the next few days, and who's to say they haven't already, then that's still the plan. You know, Tony Khan was on television on Wednesday promising to announce on Dynamite this week the location of that June 17th show. So we're going to know by Wednesday if they're running Chicago or not. If they have Punk, then they run Chicago. If they don't have Punk, I don't see how they can run Chicago. And I don't mean just as far as selling tickets to a building like that, a big building. I mean anywhere in Chicago. The fucking flea market in the parking lot somewhere. How are you going to run Chicago after all this and not have CM Punk on that first show? That's all those people are going to be expecting is a surprise return for their hometown hero. Even if he's not advertised, he wasn't advertised for the first dance either, but they all knew he would be there. It'll be CM Punk chants all night long, nonstop. But they don't have a lot of time to play with here. You know, I've been talking about Collision being the CM Punk show, but really, I've had it wrong. We've been watching the CM Punk show play out in real time. And it doesn't seem like there's going to be a happy ending to this show. Whether it be now, 6 months from now, or a year from now. We'll have a better sense of where things stand on Wednesday. If they announce Chicago as the location, and maybe they announce Punk too, but if they run Chicago, I cannot imagine him not being there. And finally, at long last, it sounds like we may be only days away from an announcement of when people can play AEW Fight Forever. I'm convinced at this point that the reason the game has been delayed is they've been adding a CM Punk mode, maybe a brawl out mode. I would love to play that mode more than anything in the ring. You know, brawl out mode can just be all this backstage bullshit. You see Tony Khan on screen. You have to make a choice. What decision does he make? Who does he fire? Who does he suspend? You know, we have to schedule a backstage meeting. I'd play that game.